For centuries, thinkers, philosophers, and scientists have all looked at the bizarre world of our dreams and the altered reality of psychosis and thought, hey, there's something weirdly similar going on here. It's a comparison that just feels right, doesn't it? But what if we could actually map it using a new kind of geometry of thought? That's exactly what we're going to dive into today.
So let's start with the big, provocative question. Is dreaming just a temporary form of psychosis that we all experience every night? I mean, it's a wild thought, but it pushes us to understand the very structure of how we think. So just how deep does this rabbit hole go?
All right, first things first, let's look at this surface level stuff, the similarities that make this comparison so compelling in the first place. Both of these states can throw us into worlds that feel unbelievably real, where the most bizarre things happen and we just accept them. But how do they really stack up side by side?
Okay, this chart really lays it all out. Look at the parallels. In both dreams and schizophrenia, your mind is basically generating its own reality, right? Perception without any external input. And that little voice in your head that does a reality check, it gets a lot quieter. But, and this is the big one, the crucial difference is right there at the bottom. Dreams are temporary, you wake up. Psychosis, on the other hand, is a persistent state that affects waking life. Now, to go any deeper, we've got to update our vocabulary. The way clinicians and researchers talk about these conditions has changed a lot. We've moved away from these old, rigid boxes and towards something way more fluid.
So you've probably heard of these older subtypes before, like paranoid-type schizophrenia. The problem was these labels just weren't very reliable. People could shift between them, and they didn't really tell us much about what was going on underneath. That's why they were officially scrapped in the latest diagnostic manuals. They just weren't that useful.
And that brings us to the modern approach, thinking in dimensions. Instead of trying to fit people into a box, clinicians now rate the severity of different symptom areas. For instance, they'll look at positive symptoms. And that doesn't mean good, it means experiences that are added, like hallucinations. Then there are negative symptoms, things that are lost, like emotional expression. It's a much more accurate and flexible way to see the whole picture.
Now, this shift to thinking in dimensions is a huge deal, because once you stop seeing these things as fixed categories, you need a new way to describe how they work. And this opens the door for a totally new kind of model, one that sees our mental states not as static points, but as dynamic journeys.
And here it is. It's called the Brain Kinematics Model, or BKM. Kinematics is just the study of motion. So this model takes that idea and applies it to our minds. It suggests that a thought isn't a thing, it's a trajectory, a path that moves through a kind of geometric landscape in our mind. Cool, right? So let's walk through what a typical healthy thought pathway looks like in this model. It all starts with sensory input, something you see or hear. That info goes into your mental workspace. Then your brain starts pulling up related long-term memories. The path is then shaped by what the BKM calls emotion hills, basically how emotionally important the information is. And finally, the pathway ends in an output, a decision, something you say, or an action. It's a nice, smooth journey from A to B.
Okay, so that's the smooth, well-paved road. But what happens when the geometry of that pathway gets altered? What happens when the journey goes off course? This, right here, is the revolutionary idea at the heart of the BKM. It reframes schizophrenia not as a broken brain, but as a curvature disorder. It's saying there's a persistent change in the actual shape and dynamics of how thought moves. The machine isn't broken. The path it follows is just different. And this is where the model gets really powerful. It connects specific symptoms to these geometric shapes. Take hallucinations. The model sees that as the thought path bending way too early into internal memory, basically overpowering what's coming in from your senses. Disorganized thought? That's like a stitching failure, where the path becomes all jagged and jumpy, like a glitchy movie. Even something like flat affect gets a geometric description. The whole emotional landscape is flat, but with these weird, sharp spikes of importance that distort everything. Now, I know what you might be thinking. This is a really powerful, really intuitive metaphor. But for it to be more than just a cool idea, it has to be testable. How do you actually turn a metaphor like this into real, hard science? Well, there are 3 absolutely crucial steps. First, you have to operationalize it. That means you have to turn a concept like curvature into something you can actually measure, like speech patterns or brain connectivity. Second, you anchor those measurements to the clinical dimensions we talked about earlier. And third, and this is key for any good science, it has to be falsifiable. It has to make predictions that you could, in theory, prove wrong. And this quote just nails it. Without taking these rigorous steps, any new model, no matter how compelling it sounds, risks staying just an interesting story. The goal here is to move from a poetic description to a predictive scientific tool.
So ultimately, what this new model gives us is a powerful new lens. Instead of asking, what's broken, it asks, what is the shape of this experience? From the temporary psychosis of our nightly dreams to more persistent conditions, this geometric view opens up a really fascinating frontier, the possibility of truly mapping the pathways of the mind. Thanks so much for joining us for this explainer.